Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're tackling a really fascinating and honestly surprisingly common psychological archetype, the Puer Aeternus, which is just Latin for the eternal boy.
Okay, let's just jump right in with this idea, because it frames the whole thing perfectly. Think of a hot air balloon that never drops its sandbags. It wants to stay up, to be free, right? But that so-called freedom just leads to isolation. And that endless flight, it becomes a slow, quiet drift into, well, into nothing. This is the core problem we're going to unpack today.
All right, so that brings us to our first section. Let's get a really clear definition of what we're talking about here.
So what exactly is the Puer Aeternus? Well, like I said, it literally means eternal boy. But this isn't just about loving video games or not wanting to grow up on the surface. No, this is much deeper. We're talking about a psychological structure that basically keeps a man frozen in adolescence, long after his teen years are distant memory.
So you get this picture of a total contradiction, right? On the one hand, there's this charm, this youthful, creative spark that's really attractive. But underneath all that, there's often this deep, gnawing emptiness and anxiety, a feeling of being out of step with life and relationships that just feel, well, hollow because there's always one foot out the door.
So how does this actually play out in real life? What does it look like day to day for someone living this archetype?
And this is really the core of it, this idea of the provisional life. It's like you're literally living in a waiting room for your own life to begin. The job you have? Oh, that's just temporary. The city you're in? Just for now. Everything is just a placeholder until your real life starts. The huge problem, of course, is that it never does. And this really gets to the heart of the conflict. On one side, you have this incredible, intoxicating dream of endless potential. I mean, why choose one path and become a doctor when you could also be an artist or an explorer or an entrepreneur? To commit feels like you're killing off all those other possible versions of yourself. And that fear leads directly to the other side, avoiding concrete reality at all costs. Nothing in the here and now is ever good enough to really commit to.
So what this all boils down to is you end up being a ghost in your own life. You're physically here, but your mind, your heart, they're somewhere else entirely, lost in a fantasy future. A future that never comes because you refuse to lay the bricks in the present. Okay, but why? Why all the avoidance? What is the poor so terrified of? Well, that's what we're digging into next. The deep-seated fear at the very center of all this. And he actually has a name for this thing he fears. He calls it the box system. And what is that? It's basically all the structures of a normal adult life. You know, the 9-to-5 job, the mortgage, marriage, commitments, routines, everything that anchors a person to solid ground.
And what's so wild is how this box can be seen in two completely different ways. For the pure, it's a suffocating trap, a prison, the death of his creative spirit. But from a more integrated, mature point of view, that exact same structure is seen as a foundation. It's the scaffolding you need to build something real, a vessel that can actually contain and direct your real power.
All right, so let's go a little deeper. Where does this even come from? What are the hidden forces, the unseen anchors that create and hold this archetype in place?
Well, it seems to come down to two big things working together. One is an internal force, the psychological anchor holding him back. And the other is an external one, a kind of void in the world around us.
Okay, first up, that internal anchor. This is what's often called the mama's boy shadow. And we're talking about a deep psychological entanglement with the mother figure, one that effectively stops a man from developing his own autonomy, his own independence.
And just to be clear, this isn't about, loving your mom. It's about this lack of a psychological spine. Without that inner support, he can't really stand on his own 2 feet. So he ends up looking for other people, partners, bosses, institutions, to basically mother him, to take care of him, which allows him to stay in that protected, childlike state.
And then there's the other piece of the puzzle, the external part. It's about the fact that our modern world is, well, it's missing something really important, meaningful rites of passage. Throughout history, cultures had these intense, powerful rituals to mark the transition from boy to man, to basically force the child out of the nest.
Because without that clear line in the sand, that moment where society says, okay, the child is gone, the adult is here now, a lot of guys just get stuck.
They get an adult body, an adult job, but that deep internal transformation, it just never happens. They're left adrift in a permanent adolescence.
So, okay, if someone's stuck in this pattern, is there a way out? Is that a life sentence? Absolutely not. And that's what we're looking at in our final section, the path forward.
And the way out, believe it or not, involves a total 180. It's about willingly, consciously embracing the very box he was so afraid of. It's about a complete mindset shift, seeing responsibility not as a cage, but as the essential scaffolding you need to actually build a meaningful life.
So this whole path to integration really boils down to 3 key steps. First, you have to consciously give up that waiting room mindset. Second, you have to turn around and confront that mama's boy shadow, that internal dependency. And finally, you have to voluntarily, with your eyes wide open, choose to embrace the box.
What this really means is you gotta choose to get in the game. It's about committing to real things in the real world. It's about hard work, taking on responsibility, and willingly enduring the discipline it takes to build a career, or a relationship, or a skill. And this brings us full circle, right back to that hot air balloon. The flight, the freedom, that was never the real goal. It was an illusion. The only way to actually start living, to have any real power or meaning, is to have the courage to land, to touch the solid ground of reality.
So I'll leave you with this final thought to chew on. Whether this idea describes you, or maybe someone you know, it's a powerful question for any of us. What are the things you're holding on to? The fears of commitment, the childish attachments? What sandbags do you need to drop to finally land and start building something real?